Shalom this morning. Welcome to Friday Bible study. Once again, we continue in the book of Jeremiah, chapter 41. Bob Mendelson, head of Jews for Jesus Australasia, will be teaching us from the Word. And of course, we will invite you back into the room after the lesson for a Q&A. It is not recorded. So please, if you'd like to be part of the Bible study, send us an email at admin@jewsforjesus.org.au and we'll send you a link. And if you have not yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please subscribe and press like. That will get people to join as well. That would be awesome. So without further ado, please, in this festive high holiday season, we continue with the Bible study. Bob Mendelson.
There we go. Lashana Tova to each of you as we meet this morning on Zoom and as we continue to process the 10 days, this period of Jewish history and, dare I say, human history, when God sought and seeks a visit with each one of us. During these special 10 days, we're invited to meet with the King. That's why we wear a crown like a mitre in prayers. That's why we use more royal imagery during this season than any other time of the year. The King is the one who is not only royal, but the judge as well. And we want to make right with that judge and make sure that all our wrongs are made right and that all our relationships are good. That we are reading Jeremiah 41 on this Friday study amplifies the sadness about meeting the king or the king's representative here in this chapter. You know that millions, if not billions of people watched at least some of the endings of Queen Elizabeth. Farewelling someone after they pass is a tribute many would have experienced, even some of you on this Zoom call or those of you watching on YouTube later. The royals are for many a fascination, and for others mere quaint, dispensable historical formality. But here in our Bible text, we see activities after the King Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, is removed. He was killed 2 chapters ago, and perhaps years earlier, and now the scene shifts with new characters, but the same problem. And what is that problem? The Babylonians are invading. They're conquering Judah, taking the temple down, and the choice of submitting or not by the people of God. If you've not yet read this chapter, you there on YouTube, please pause your playback now, then read the chapter, Jeremiah chapter 41, then press play on your machine and rejoin us. Thanks. Welcome back. Last week we met Gedaliah, who's the right man for the job, after Zedekiah the king was slain. Gedaliah had believed the words of Jeremiah the prophet. He knew that submitting to the conquest was the only real way to win, to keep the Jewish people together, to have any chance of returning and rebuilding the temple and the hopes of the Jewish people. And we thought, good, finally, a king's rep who thinks like Josiah, the old good king, had thought. But there was that warning that his mate Yohanan gave him. That stood out to me, and maybe it did to you as you read it as well. Yohanan cautioned Gedaliah, both publicly and privately, that this guy named Ishmael was not a man to be trusted. Yohanan actually offered to represent the Jewish mafia and take out Ishmael. But Gedaliah was hoping, really against hope, that this would not be necessary. Gedaliah was hoping to get everyone on side with himself and to save as many as possible. The king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, had indicated some forms of generosity to Gedaliah, had sent supplies and sent notice that the poor could stick around and tend to the fields. Disruption was going to be minimal if you consider that a foreign army was invading, looting, demolishing your sacred temple and other holy sites to be minimally disruptive. Gedaliah saw the glass as half full, and he wanted everyone to treat him and the situation as such. No wonder Nebuchadnezzar had made him the food and service mayor of sorts. But chapter 41 begins with the reintroduction of this fellow Ishmael, who it says in verse 1 was a member of the royal family. And he was a chief officer of the former king. Ishmael brought 10 other men with him to a dinner party that Gedaliah hosted. Don't read this as being in a palace. There was no palace in Mizpah. So let's unpack this. Who is Ishmael and why did he do this? That's the first of our 3 sections today. Who is Ishmael and why did he do this? Verse 2 tells us that all 11 seemed to take up their swords and slay Gedaliah, the food and service organizer. Well, what a sad moment in Jewish history. And what prompted this slaying? Some have said in commentaries that Ishmael was a jealous man and envious of the position that he felt should have been his. After all, he was as royal as Gedaliah, and maybe even more so, and he felt deserving of the position of overseer. Other commentators have made a point that Ishmael saw Gedaliah as a coward and one who should not have given away the store to Babylon. They say that Ishmael felt that Judah, or whatever is left of Judah at that point, should have fought to save themselves from this conquering army of Nebuchadnezzar. Either way you want to see this, and the Bible's not clear as to Ishmael's motivation, though we're going to see more of it, he's out of touch with God and with God's heart for his own people. Envy never works the work of God. Listen to this, as the mountains were chided by the psalmist in Psalm 68. Quote, "Why do you look with envy, O mountains, with many peaks, at the mountain which God has desired for his abode? Surely the Lord will dwell there forever." Obviously talking about Jerusalem and all you other mountains, you're less significant. Similarly, people are called to stop living in envy in the Proverbs, where we read this, quote, "Don't let your heart envy sinners, but live in the fear of the Lord always." Paul and Peter agree that envy is a lousy motivator in their letters. Paul wrote this to Titus, quote, "For we also once were foolish ourselves, disobedient, deceived, enslaved to various lusts and pleasures, spending our life in malice and envy, hateful, hating one another." It seems to be a progression of things and the way to get totally wrong with God. And Peter said something as well in 1 Peter 2. He said this, quote, "Putting aside all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander." That's a list you don't want to have anything applied to you. The mountains are chided by the psalmist in Psalm 68, and whether the mountains, the people, the wicked, or the apostle Titus and all who read Paul's letters and Peter's letters, we are informed that envy is dangerous and leads to all kinds of worse evil. So perhaps it was envy that led Ishmael to this horrible act. But then as you keep reading, you discover his rage doesn't end with the killing of Gedaliah, nor does our sadness stop there. In verse 3, Ishmael also killed all the Jewish people who were with Gedaliah at that dinner, whether they were serving in the background, attending to other guests or other activities, perhaps among the poor, as we see in the next scene. Ishmael also kills all the Chaldean military. Maybe not the proudest and best of the military force. After all, they just left a little station there. But whoever those Chaldean military were, they were in attendance, and that leads some to the comment about the cowardice of Gedaliah. Whatever you think about Ishmael, his life goes from bad to seriously worse. Look at verse 4 and following. Some poor Jews came, 80 it says in total, and they looked like they had tattered appearance and gashed bodies. I think they'd probably gone through some of the battles 18 months earlier there around Jerusalem. It's also possible that they were very religious. It looks like they're bringing offerings to God. What we do know is that they'd escaped. They'd been from these three places, Shiloh, Shechem, and Samaria. But now they'd heard that Gedaliah and the remnant would take care of them, and they wanted to gather with the community. There was community there, and they were desperate for real, honest fellowship. They brought offerings of grain and incense. The house of the Lord was gone, so they tried to bring it there, but it's gone or going. And they found out that there was hope in Gedaliah and the gathering. It's kind of a pleasant place to stop. This is great. I like these people. I like Gedaliah. I like Yohanan. I mean, there's some seriously good people in this story, aren't there? And in the second section of our reading today, verses 4 through 10, we see that these visitors with offerings are welcomed. That's kind of nice. The sadness, though, is amplified as Ishmael left Mizpah, that's where they were headquartered, to go out and meet them. Mind you, it's only a few miles away. And he pretended sadness himself, weeping, it says in verse 6, and offering an invitation to come meet with Gedaliah, whom Ishmael had already killed, but these visitors, these 80, did not know that Gedaliah was dead. Ishmael made himself out to be an usher, the greeter, a helper, but all the while he's an angry, loathsome, evil, and envious man. How we act, get this, friends, how we act determines much of our thinking. What we think also determines our actions. You decide. Perform the actions of love and you'll be a loving person. Perform the actions of hate and envy and you'll be an envious and hating person. It's actually that simple. Ishmael in verse 7 turns on the 80, and with his men they kill 70 of them. Now, I don't know how many men he had. At the end, we only see Ishmael and 8 fellows. So I don't know if he had more or if he just caught them completely off guard without any weapons. Actually, the Bible doesn't list any of their inventory of goods as including any weaponry. That's in verse 5. Or maybe there were just more than 70 on the Ishmael team. I don't know. It doesn't say. But as it turns out, the 70 are killed just like that. Or at least over the course of an hour or half a day. We don't know how long it took, but 70 dead Jewish men. And as it turns out, 10 of the 80 offered some hidden treasure. Don't put us to death. We've got lots more money and barley and wheat and oil and so much more. By the way, you'll never find it. We've hidden it in the fields. So they try a bartering, and it makes sense to the slayer. So he spares those 10. Ishmael is bought off by the 10. And it makes you wonder if greed and avarice, or what we today call materialism, wasn't his main motivation in life. So we'll have to revisit that dinner party with Gedaliah and think maybe he's attracted to the power and the riches that are there in what's not even a palace, but just a nice home. Bounty, personal goods. I could do this. And then he rises up and kills them. We don't know. The 70, it says, were piled into the cistern that King Asa had made. The commentator Keown says this, quote, "The reference may be intended as no more than a concrete historical contact for the slaughter by Ishmael." In other words, we need a place to put them. Here's the place. That's enough. A more speculative reading could possibly note a linkage between 2 times of disorder, characteristic of the hubris that had afflicted Israel throughout her history, though such a proposal is indeed only speculation, end quote. That's what happened in King Asa's time. There were 2 Israels. and they had a cistern built, and that's the very one. So it could be a play on that, ironic, if you will, or it could just be a location that's known. In verse 10, Ishmael continues his own kingdom building practices by taking prisoner all these people. He's kidnapping them, really, King Zedekiah's daughters and anyone else who's there in Mizpah. And he walked over or towards Ammon, that's east of the Jordan, and there they would remain. At least that was the plan. Probably he was going to go to Ammon to ingratiate himself to the king there. And the third section today, 11 to 17, shows Yohanan as the hero. I like that. After word got out of the slaughter of the 70 and their commensurate burial of sorts, Yohanan gathered some of the other military leaders and went to hunt Ishmael. Now that Gedaliah was no longer there to impose sanctions on and prevention of the killing of the renegade Ishmael, Yohanan takes the initiative once again and went in verse 12 to fight with him. And he found him, I'm going to say, in a strange place. It says here he's in Gibeon. It doesn't make any sense to me. Gibeon is southwest of Mizpah. Ammon is east of Mizpah. If he's going towards Ammon, he's geographically challenged. Well, maybe though you could say, he had the 10 who said that we've got buried treasure out in our fields. And so he's following them and looking, and they're saying, yeah, it's just over here, another eight kilometers, keep going this way. And they end up in Gibeon. That's okay. But then again, maybe he caught him en route to Ammon in a place called Gibeah, which is east of Mizpah, en route towards Ammon. Either answer works for me. I'm not stressed by apparent problems in the text. Gibeah or Gibeon, either way, he's caught him. And the captives that Ishmael had taken, the kidnapped daughters and others who were there in Mizpah, all saw that Yohanan was on their tail, and they made haste. They left Ishmael and returned to remnant living in Mizpah. But when you think about it, where could they go? North was out, east was now. North is out because that's where Babylon is, and east is out because that's really where Babylon is, but that's also where Ammon is. West was too wet, you can't go there. They had one choice, to go to Egypt and south. So off they proceed to Egypt. Verse 17, and we'll pick that up next week as well. Meanwhile, Ishmael makes his intentions clear as he saddles up near the king of Ammon and probably seeks to gain entry into their goodwill and earn some glory there. It says that he only has 8 men at this point with him, and where the others are, it's anyone's guess. I wonder if at least 2 of them were among those who returned to Mizpah, or they could have died in some battle. Ishmael appears in clear contrast with both Gedaliah and Yohanan, and of course Jeremiah, who, by the way, is not mentioned even once in chapter 41. Ishmael, he's a man of envy, political pandering. He's murderous. He's an evil man who seeks favor from people and cash in hand. His enterprise is seeking his own glory and his own benefits. Then compare him with Gedaliah, who is a trusting soul and wants the best for his own people. Yohanan is a realist who seeks the safety of the people of God and their welfare. There are really only 2 options in life, and these men characterize one side and the other. So let me ask, which team are you on? Those who seek God or those who seek benefits for themselves? Are you seeking the good of the people around you, or are you seeking your own riches and honor? The choice, it's yours. The reality is that you are only going to be on one team or the other. Think about this. Yeshua, the Jewish Messiah, who had every capacity and every right for glory and honor, benefited people over and over and over again during his 3+ years of public ministry, healing the less fortunate, providing food for thousands at a time, never looking down on others, but offering hands to lift. At his appointed hour, he chose to lay it all down. He could have called on angels to spare him from the cross. He could have walked away and said, "You people don't deserve me. I'm better than all this. I've earned my time in the sun. I'm calling on my Father to spare me." In Matthew 26, "Or do you think that I cannot appeal to my Father and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels?" Yes, he could have done that. But what did he do instead? He laid down his life. He gave himself for us. He offered himself as a sacrifice, as a kapora, to give us eternal life. He chose to die in our place that we might have what he already owned. Paul wrote to the Corinthians and said, "God made him who knew no sin to become sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God in him." Yeshua, our model, our hero, our sacrifice, our eternal kapora, our eternal atonement. He's the reason I'm alive today. And during these 10 days, when so many Jewish people worldwide are reflecting on sin and salvation, you can't get to salvation without thinking about sin. You don't need salvation if there's no sin in your life. No, if things are right, I'm good. Can I offer you some help? Oh no, thanks, I'm good. It'd be like you're in the Sydney Harbor and you fell off the Manly Ferry, or you're somewhere in the middle of Orlando, Florida today, where the rain is continuing to flood all across Central Florida, and there you are caught. I saw a video yesterday on the news of a car park, a parking lot, underneath a housing structure, a residence, and the water went in and the cars were all flooded already. This was before the floods came. It would be like you're in your car, or you're in the Manly Ferry and you fall out, or you're walking across Disney World, which by the way I think closed yesterday, and all of a sudden you're caught out, you're in a floodwater and you don't know what to do. And somebody comes along and says, "Can I throw you, one of those rings, those life-saving rings, lifesavers? Can I throw you that?" You say, No, I'm good. You say, "I'm good," you're an idiot. You say you're good, you're going to die. I mean, plain and simple. Marco Rubio in Florida said, if you don't, and whatever it was that he was told to say by the emergency people, he said, if you don't do that, you will die. I mean, he was clear as clear could be. And I think that's exactly the kind of forthright conversation we need to have, and be forthright, honest, and help people to see. During these 10 days, we're not talking about, just amend your way a little bit. No, we're talking about our desperate need for something to save us from our natural inclination, which is sin, self-centeredness, selfishness. If you get that you've got sin, and sin is a preventative, it stops your relationship with God. If you get that, then you'll look for something. So throw me a lifesaver, throw me something. You can't say, no, I got this, I'll just swim through the floodwaters. We've watched too many people die here in Sydney and Lismore during the floods, and certainly during this hurricane in Florida. You can't save yourself. Sin says, I can't save myself. Sin says, I'm desperate for salvation. What is that? How do I get that? And that's when you and I come along and say, sin, salvation, it's in the Savior. It's the person that God sent that we might become the righteousness of God in him. That's what I'm pondering in these 10 days. He's the reason I'm alive today, and I celebrate him during these days and every day. Jimmy, let me turn it back over to you. Thanks, brother.
What a magnificent passage that is. And once again, we get to see how human nature operates. Wow, Jeremiah, it's amazing. The heart is desperately wicked. Who can know it? But you know what? There's a God that does know it, and who cares, and who loves you, loves me. Sent his son to die for us, and that if we would believe in him, believe that he is Lord, confess that God raised him from the dead, we too shall know that salvation. If you have not yet, please take a moment with me. Just ask him, Lord, show me. Show me if Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, as I've heard. If for years I want to be part of it, I want to be part of him, the family of God. If you've cried out in any way in your own words, please let us know at admin@jewsforjesus.org.au. We'd love to send you some literature. We'd love to stand with you. We'd love to pray with you. You are part of the family of God. Welcome. In the meantime, don't forget, Shabbat Shalom, and we look forward to seeing you on Wednesday at our Yom Kippur service in Bondi Junction. If you'd like to join us, please make yourself welcome. And of course, also, don't forget, next week we continue Friday Bible Study, chapter 42 of the book of Jeremiah. We are getting close. So, Shabbat Shalom.